everyone, and welcome to Dissonant Dialogues. I'm Emily, and I'm here with Claire. Claire, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I feel like you're always doing well, and I'm always the one with all the tragic stories. We were laughing prior to the recording that I'm not feeling well during the COVID episode. I think it's a combined different aspects of my life, primarily PTSD. I guess that's making me not feeling well. But today is a little bit of a lighter episode. It's just a global pandemic.
That's all. No big deal.
I think we've touched on worse so far, but we are going to be talking about our experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic and how it impacted our music careers at the time and then quite literally forever. We have some unique but similar experiences because I was a senior in high school when this was going on, about to enter conservatory, and Claire was a senior in
Yeah,
conservatory,
a
right?
super senior. So,
Yeah. So
fifth
yeah, it
year.
was your final year, yeah, in conservatory. So it was that we both had our transition experiences during a pandemic where like I'm going from high school into conservatory and you're going from conservatory to the so-called real world. Yeah, I think it'll be very informative and also just seeing how much the music world has changed because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that we're perfectly poised in order and to know that like I had a normal college experience and then the end was very abruptly and tragically cut off in a really sudden and distressing way. But then your entire degree was shaped by it. And in some cases, they had a little bit, not much, a little bit more time to prepare for it than they did for us. Kind of. You had the experience of this is transitioning into what the new normal is. And I think those are both really traumatizing and disappointing in different ways. So we sort of run the gamut of college experiences for the pandemic. And we definitely want to hear from anyone who's listening, like, what were things like for you? I'm curious about the people who got it halfway through their degree and and the people who are starting now and what things are like now that we've had a few years to sort of standardize some new methods, new standards, or to just throw them all away. We're seeing some of that too.
Yeah. So the before, I call this the before March 13th, 2020. I think that was a very common date for a lot of schools that everything all of a sudden changed. My life at the time, I was a very focused musician. Music was all my life. I had just completed All-State. I was at All-State. I made it to the honors ensemble and everything. I was working so hard and I had such tunnel vision just to do what I got to do to get out of high school and get to conservatory and like be where I want to be and doing my own thing, that I didn't know for the longest time that there was a pandemic even starting, because that like now I hear back and I'm like, oh, okay, so this was well happening before March in 2020. Like during the pandemic, this was a thing that was still actively going on. I can't remember exactly when it came to the United States, but like it had been there and it had been in Illinois like already for a while.
Our country really had blinders on though, I think.
Yeah, but I guess that's where I get it from is where I'm growing up. And I had, college auditions that were actively going on. Luckily, I'd completed my college auditions before any major shifts had occurred. I was in the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra. I was in their second top ensemble, and I'd actually just been promoted to principal second violin, which was huge. Like, it is so competitive. And to be placed in a section leader chair, that was a huge deal. So that was very exciting. And we were going to be playing on the Symphony Center stage. That was going to be my very first time stepping out on that stage. So I was like very much looking forward to it. I was also teaching some private lessons at the time. That's kind of like what my life looked like. And then just, survive in high school, which is always a challenge.
Yeah, it's true.
Having my tunnel vision, the one thing I do remember is one of my friends in orchestra making a joke about COVID, which probably sounds very dark, but that was, I think, my first time where I really like clicked and like, oh, okay, this is something that's like actively happening and affecting like me now here. Like I think I knew it was a thing, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is like a thing because now we're talking about it in like my environment. And I remember I'm still friends with her to this day. And she was like, oh yeah, like it's called COVID-19, but people are starting to call it the boomer remover. Like, oh my God. It's such a dark joke that I remember that. But I do remember that. That's a little snippet that sticks in my brain. And I was just like, oh, okay. I had been diagnosed with IBS my sophomore year of high school, and it significantly impacted my grades that year. I was able to get everything back up after that year, but it was just like a plummeted drop in my grades. And my teachers in the school, not my music teachers, the school teachers never helped or accommodated for that. I had one teacher that really helped me like get out of that and be able to like get my health together and focus, like having the mental state, the right mental state. But otherwise, nobody there cared. Colleges accept by grades first and then the music school. Maybe there's a select few that do it different. I don't know. But every single university I applied for, yes, that was exactly how they do it.
That was my case too.
Yeah, so it was frustrating because there were some schools, I was having a rough year. I mean, I was applying to these schools and I was being denied acceptance all because of my grades that one year. Everything else I did really well and I had A's, B's, but that one year everything plummeted. I didn't fail anything, but it showed that everything dropped. And I had written in my applications, because there's usually a section, anything you want us to know, I'd explained why, but they don't want somebody that has some sort of a chronic condition coming to their school. It's too much of a risk. They're not going to put their cards on you. So it was pretty difficult seeing that, because there were people that had higher grades than me that were my age, but my abilities on my instrument were much stronger and had a lot more experience. But they were getting accepted to the conservatories and I was not, because of that. And it was like confusing for my teachers too. And they were like, okay, we don't understand how this is happening. You know, there's connections in the music world, and my teachers were asking, and yeah, everything was confirmed. It was a great thing. There was even a time where I was going to, it was my third top school I wanted to get into. And I went there and I auditioned. And then I was taking the long drive back after the audition. It was an exhausting day. And after the audition, I pull out my phone and I look and I see an email from another school I'd applied for. And my audition there was in a week, and it was kind of like a travel school. Like I had to travel to get there. And they canceled my audition. They said they looked at my grades and they were like, yeah, actually, we're probably not going to admit you anyway. So we're going to, I swear I can't make this stuff up. They canceled my audition. And I'm like, well, God, it was a good thing. I mean, yeah, it was a travel school. It was like 4 hours, something like that. I can't remember, that I was going to have to drive. So that was further than like other places I had gone to. And that took some preparation to figure out like how I was going to get there. I'm like, you gave me a week, like good thing I didn't live in like California and I was like going super far. So yeah, it was a hard year. That was very hard, because all I did in high school was work for conservatory. I just wanted to get out and go do my thing and create my life for myself. And there was just this buildup of this dream, and that's all I had been working for and wanted to get to. I did deal with a lot of bullying because I was a musician. All I would do after school is go home and work on my instrument. March 9th is approximately the date that I was accepted into my dream school. So I ended up getting accepted to the top conservatory that I really wanted to get into. The same day that I also got acceptances from 2 of my other safety schools. So I had been getting rejection after rejection and rejection, thinking, oh my God, like I'm going to have nowhere to go. And then one day, it took one day and I got 3 acceptances, and one was to my top school. So I was like, going there. And I had my very last performance before things were all going to shut down. I had no clue that was going to happen. But it was at our solo ensemble contest for high school. And I played the Brook Concerto, the first movement, and I played a movement of Bach. And for the Bach, I actually got an award for the best in the room that day. You know, there's countless like people that go in and out of each room. And I actually had gotten that award. So it felt like everything that had kind of fallen apart in terms of like my musical journey was starting to come back together, and things were looking brighter.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
So at the same time, well, and I definitely remember relating to all of that sort of desperation. So I do not envy the stage of life you were at, but I'm on the opposite end of that. So I'm coming to the end of my college degree. And I think what's important to note is that had I graduated on a traditional 4-year timeline, I would have graduated in 2019. So that's where a lot of this disappointment comes in, because everyone I started with, there were some people who had extra semesters in that, but they missed out on having these milestones canceled. But of course, I didn't know that. We knew a little bit about COVID because my husband's father lived in China at the time, still does part-time. We were hearing about things there. I think no one really knew what was coming. We could have. Scientists knew what was coming, but just as a country, people were making reference to it in like January. So I could remember that as that semester was starting, our school had extra hand sanitizer dispensers out. That was it. I don't know that anyone else was doing much more either. I was dealing with really severe burnout. I didn't know it at the time. I just didn't know what was wrong with me. Obviously, my health issues that I dealt with over my entire degree. which were the reason that I was taking a 5th year anyway. But I think because of that, I had sort of double senioritis, because even if your course load is spread out a little bit more, it's still crazy. You don't get a break from the culture. So the sort of the innately hypercritical, hypercompetitive culture that even if your class load is less intense, that was still an extra year that I was exposed to that very acutely. And I think that was really taking a toll on my mental health at the time. We had a lot of really intense concerts my 4th year of school, and I felt like they were great, but I felt like it really just zapped me emotionally in terms of what I was able to give. And so I was noticing that I was struggling with things I'd never struggled before. I was struggling to memorize things. I don't typically struggle to memorize things. And I just didn't feel inspired by anything. I know that something that happened was they kind of got rid of the opera. One of the rarities of the program that I went to was that instead of just having a grad opera that you could maybe try out and get into the chorus of if you were an upperclassman, we had our own junior senior opera, and then freshmen and sophomores had a showcase. And I loved that because I'm a performance major. I want to learn how to perform. I had been watching Joe, my husband, get leads in these operas for a couple of years now. And I was so ready for it. And then just as it began to be my turn, they decided to completely change it from being this low budget but staged costume production to a bunch of little tiny 1-act operas in groups of like 3 or 4, which is basically showcase, with no budget for costuming and staging. We did a little bit based on what we could provide for ourselves. That was a huge bummer. And I don't know if I've said this before, I hated the opera I was in for my senior year. Everyone acted like it was a big honor because my little 1-act opera was a solo. But I've learned how to sing alone for 5 years at this point. So I really wanted to, there are things like I'd never done a romance scene. I'd never learned how to play a villain, like stuff. I'd never learned how to do a pants roll. These things that are like the foundation of my career is I wanted the acting training. And instead I'm going up and doing, and it was called Bon Appetit. It was a short, tiny little, 20-minute opera about Julia Child, famous chef who kind of brought French cooking to America in the 60s. Really iconic person. She was like extremely tall. She talked like this all the time. But I am not a foodie. I hate cooking. I hate baking. And I wasn't excited about this role. I got into it like, I'll never not be invested when I'm actually in the process of performing. But I know that was disappointing. I felt like a lot of my last experiences have been changed before I ever got a chance to really celebrate them. I was really anxious about my senior recital. As that semester was starting, I didn't feel prepared. I was really struggling. And I was really depressed. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to figure things out in time, as there were pieces that I still hadn't even really touched as that semester was going by. That spring break, right before everything happened, I was going to be a bridesmaid for one of my closest friends. And I remember just like scanning all my music onto my tablet and being like, every spare moment you have, the entire plane ride, you need to be looking at this. The only thing you can listen to is your playlist of your recital music. Like, you've got to be solid for this. And knowing that every time I've wondered how I can do this, I've managed to pull it off before, but I really felt like this time it might catch up to me. So yeah, that's where I was. And then March 13th happened, if you want to switch over your perspective.
March 13th. Yeah. So this was when my high school was supposed to go on spring break. And spring break is usually just 1 week, but they pushed it to 2 weeks instead of 1. And then we never came back.
Yeah.
So
Same.
My private lesson students stopped. The time online teaching was just now popping up suddenly to be a thing. It was something I had never done before, but I was willing to do it. But I can't say my students, they were kids. So the parents of the students were not willing to do it. They just wanted to kind of break and see what was going on. I think they were confused as well, and taking a moment. So that happened. I was in honors. Oh God, Claire's gonna laugh at me. I was in honors chorale at the time in high school because I had
laugh
extra,
at you.
Oh, you're gonna laugh. Just wait. And I did it because I wanted to get more comfortable singing. And I was not the best singer though, but they put me in honors chorale anyway. And I ended up doing pretty well. I don't know. I had solo ensemble. I got the high score in my solo as well. So all good. But the confidence was not yet there.
Mhm.
And I had to sing online through Zoom at home. But the way that my teacher did it, which I don't know, I guess doesn't really make sense, but we were all adapting at the time, was we were all muted and singing with her. So what I was doing
Oh,
was I was mouthing the words because I was embarrassed, and rightfully so. My family makes fun of that type of stuff. I think I could say that. They don't like opera. They make fun of it all the time. They don't like singing. Like they just think it's silly and annoying. And so I
mm,
don't like to sing in front of them because I've heard them make comments about me before and about others. So I just had to sit there and mouth the words, and it was so sad. I had to sit in class. I actually tried not going to the class, and then I got like forced to. And then I would just sit there and mouth the words. So that was pretty sad. And my schoolwork, everything was online then. It was like you're getting an online degree sort of thing, even though it was high school. It was that sort of thing. Besides choir, none of my other classes met together. You got assignments and then you just submitted them. So I was done at 9 a.m. each day. I'm super early bird. So I just woke up early, pulled out my laptop, and the assignments, they were thrown together so quickly by the teachers. I just like got everything done and then was like, okay, well, I have all this time. So I just practiced harder and harder. I made it to my dream school, and I'm thinking I'm going to be going to my dream school. So just got to think positive, because if I sit in the negative, it will totally like erase me. So I'm like, good, I have more time to practice. Awesome. And
how did
then
the announcement to going to online happen for you?
it's probably an email.
Mhm.
I remember sitting in school and they announced that spring break would be 2 weeks instead of one.
Okay, so you knew that
Uh,
ahead of time.
yeah, so we knew that, but then they didn't tell us until like we were already gone that
Yeah.
then we weren't coming back.
We went on spring break. That was when I was going to be in Colorado for this wedding, and we left assuming that it was going to be 1 week. I had just put down the deposit for my cap and gown and was going to be able to pick those up when I got back in town. A few weeks, like I'd have a few weeks to finish my recital prep when I got back. I'm actually really glad that like I got to like go out on a bang like that. I got to be with one of my closest friends and like dancing the night away, and then the whole world ended. It was kind of, I don't think I realized how cathartic that would be because I wouldn't see anyone again for like 2 years. We got into Denver. We're sitting in the hotel lobby waiting for a ride share to pick us up, me and Joe, to go to the house, the Airbnb where all the bridesmaids were staying. And as we're waiting, I'm getting texts from my family. My family's like group chat. My little sisters, my youngest sister is Emily's age. So, she was also getting accepted to colleges and was starting to get emails being like, we're not sure what's going to happen. And then my middle sister was in college in Arkansas. And so they were starting to make plans. And my family was texting me and being like, what's going on with you? Because of all of their children, like this is the major that's going to spread disease the most easily. Was opera. And I was like, yeah, I haven't heard anything. And in the meantime, we had a voice majors group chat. And they're all starting to go off and being like, okay, look at what all these other schools are doing. People are starting to cancel things, and we haven't heard anything. And then the emails start to roll in. And I'm so glad I never delete anything, because I went back and I was like, do I still have these? And it was literally every couple of minutes, the email was changing. So at first they were like, everything's normal. And, just be careful. And then the next email comes in. Just kidding. We're going to take an extra week for spring break. And then everything's back to normal. And then it was, okay, the lecture classes are switching to online, but the classes that need to be in person, like voice lessons and stuff, are going to continue to be in person, which kind of defeats the purpose. Practice rooms are still going to be open. Private lessons are still going to happen. The classes, again, the things that spread disease most easily, still good. And at that point, a bunch of students started kind of protesting. I remember all my friends who were also graduating starting to say things like, they should just give us our degree. Haven't we suffered enough? Like, can they just let us go?
So it's always been
was,
a pattern that this
yeah.
school handles things badly.
Yes.
Okay,
I
not just me.
understand that like no one was prepared, but they were really dragging their feet in comparison. I mean, I'm not totally sure, but from what I was hearing from all of my other classmates who were like actually comparing, they were like looking at like the local schools and going down the list and saying they've closed, and particularly the other voice programs and music programs, because it is a degree that you really can't do online as easily as some other degrees that are more lecture based. I'm trying to update my parents, but every few minutes I'm having a new update. By the time that the rideshare pulls up, they have announced, okay, just kidding, we're closed. Performance classes are canceled. Lessons are either canceled or exclusively online. It's up to the discretion of the teachers. I think they were supposed to do online lessons, but some of the teachers just stopped. They literally just stopped teaching. They didn't even want to try to figure out the online. Whereas my teacher like spent hundreds of dollars of his own money to buy all these special programs so that his sound would synchronize with us, and was like hooking up his computer and everything. I was very grateful for that, but at the time didn't know what was happening. And then it was saying like, shows are delayed. Just kidding, they're canceled. Recitals are canceled. And they were starting to say that no one would graduate. Nobody who hadn't done their recital yet would get to graduate until the following December. And I was like, because it would have to wait that long until you could schedule your recital. And I was like, no, I already spent an extra year to get my degree. I don't, even if it's literally just a recital requirement, I don't want to do that. Attitude was like, please stand by, we'll figure this out, which is understandable. And so I think, you know, as I'm getting in the car and heading to this Airbnb, I'm like, that friend who was getting married, she had tickets to come see my recital, a few like plane tickets booked, along with my best friend. My whole family had bought tickets. They were asking me, should we refund these tickets? Should we, you know, and I was like, I guess so. Opera was canceled. You just got graded on the work you've done so far. I think part of me was relieved that the safety precautions got solidified, sort of, but also I don't think I really had a chance to start the grieving process of losing all of those big, you know, your final opera, your final choir concert, your senior recital, which is, you know, you spend your entire degree working for that. That is supposed to be the showcase of everything that you've worked for. It's supposed to be such a reflection of you. And I don't think it hit me yet that like, I wouldn't have a ceremony. I wouldn't have any of these things because my head was in this wedding. And so I was kind of, you know, like laughing with my friend, like cynically laughing and being like, oh God, what's gonna happen? But I don't think I had a chance to process it until I got home. It was very weird. You know, my family was invited to this wedding too. They came, you know, obviously I was there early as a bridesmaid. They came the night before. They brought extra masks and things. The airport going home, first, the Denver airport is like cursed. It like has all these conspiracy theories about it. So it's already got a weird vibe. It was a different world. It was a zoo. Everyone who had been going to Colorado on spring break was like trying to get out, trying to get home before, worried that things would close. So it's just like people carrying like pounds of ski gear, because that's mainly what people were traveling there for. Just like big skis. People didn't have masks, so people had like shirts tied around their mouths and things like that. But like then security was making people take it off. Everybody was panicked. We did not know what to do. We didn't know what was going to be normal. We get home on a Sunday. Monday is the day that lockdown is announced. And because we just left town, we didn't have groceries. You know, we did the thing when you leave town, you clean out your fridge and stuff because you don't want stuff to go bad. So we had no food. We had one roll of toilet paper. I remember that. And we always just, on the way home from the airport, we always just make a habit of going to the store. Empty, no meat, no produce, no cleaning supplies, no toilet paper. Everything was gone. And we were like, oh no, what are we gonna do? And that following Monday was also the election. So even though it was lockdown, there was no time for like them to like recalibrate it. So you still had to go vote. So I remember that I did have a box of medical masks because I'd been sick a few months before. So I had like a mask on and gloves. I dye my own hair, so I always have latex gloves. And like just going to the polling place, like, don't know what to do, but oh well. What I didn't know at the time was that my husband was planning to propose at my senior recital. And coincidentally, with my friends who were flying in and my siblings and everyone, I would have had all 6 of my bridesmaids who all live in different states. They all would have been in the audience for that. And so they were all texting me about like, should I cancel? Is your recital happening? My friend who I was a bridesmaid for was about to start her residency as a military doctor. So she really got a baptism by fire, literally right after her wedding. Her honeymoon period was a global pandemic, which I'm sure was extremely traumatizing. It really did feel like spring break never ended. Sometimes I still feel like I'm on spring break in 2020. Obviously, lecture classes were fairly simple. A lot of professors individually dropped a lot of things, simplified finals, dropped certain assignments because everybody was struggling from a mental health perspective. A lot of people lost their housing. A lot of people at the same time as trying to finish up their degrees suddenly had to move home. People were in different states, in different time zones, in some cases in different countries. So a lot of teachers became pretty lax. Our diction class was really wholesome. We dropped a lot of assignments, but we all read poems. We had a class that was just like reading poems about how we felt, poems on themes of isolation or togetherness or things being broken. There was a lot of like the Black Lives Matter protests at this time too. So just emotions were high. There was an amount of wholesomeness, not so much from our institution, but from good individuals within it. I really didn't feel like the quality of my online voice lessons was satisfying, but I knew how hard my teacher was trying. It was just one of those things where it was like, well, that's not his fault. The dean reached out to me and said like, okay, here's the options for the recital. We're not opening up our school again. You can choose to have it at a different venue and live stream it for the panel and we'll watch it. You can do it on Zoom with recording accompaniment and again, the panel of judges watching. You can choose to have it later and graduate in December, or you can apply to be accepted for an extension or apply to have a substitute for your grade, which would be that your teacher signs off that you have met all your requirements, that you would have been ready had you performed this, and then you write a paper. And because of being immunocompromised and not wanting to delay graduation any further, that's what I did. And you had until like the end of July to finish that. It was one of those things where nothing really ended at the same time. It was like some classes finished in May as normal, but then lessons had been delayed. So lessons finished throughout the summer, and then certain recital requirements weren't due until the end of July. And then the degree, you didn't technically graduate until August, and then things weren't mailed until October. There wasn't like a day that was like, this is my last week of school. This is the day I graduated. That was, I think that is what was trippy. I started building dollhouses from scratch. My husband and I are both deeply introverted. And then on our 4-year dating anniversary, he proposed on April 16th, and my recital was supposed to have been April 17th. So I got engaged in the middle of all that too. And it was nice to kind of be alone during that without the pressure of like visiting tons of family and everything. I did really start mourning. It was the first time I had ever had time for hobbies in my life. So I think I was really, really discovering who I was in the midst of everything. I was massively spiritually reconstructing because again, it was the first time that I had time for that, dealing with my religious trauma. My plan had been to take my year after school, tour a bunch of different universities for grad school, take as many trial lessons as possible, and audition for some local light opera companies and choirs. If I was going to get a job offer, then great, I would do that. If I got into a good school, then great, I would do that. But then suddenly those things didn't exist. I didn't really know what I would be doing with my life, except for wedding planning.
The fun high school senior things that I had to miss because of the pandemic was my solo. Some students were like hand selected that were seniors and that were going to be majoring in music or that were just section leaders or really promising, got to do solos at our final concert. And I was going to get to play the first movement of the Brook Concerto, which to me felt like a big thing. I'm like, I'm going to get to solo with an orchestra finally. What they did was we all sent in videos of us playing, and they put little like snippets of it, of each person playing. There was a little like time limit for it. And so they did the best that they could, but it was not anywhere near the same. I did receive for the second time the National School Orchestra Award because I received it when I graduated 8th grade. But this time when I got it, I was alone and on Zoom when they announced my name for it. So I wasn't really happy. I mean, like I put on like a fake smile because like that's what you're supposed to do. But there was too much going on to like truly enjoy it. I didn't get to do the senior banquet, which is where we get our senior awards. I did get my award for most promising musician or like best musician. It was something like that. And that was after I'd already gotten my senior banquet dress. There was no prom either. I'd also already gotten my prom dress. And I never got to go to a prom. There was no like real graduation. It was in person is what they did, but it was one person at a time could walk inside across the stage with a mask on, and you got one family member to walk in with you to take a picture.
That's how my youngest sister did it too.
This is so depressing. The car ride to go to my graduation, right? I'm in my cap and gown. I don't get to see any of my friends. I just have to, it's basically just for the picture. And so then you receive your thing and then you're done. The entire car ride going there, I was with my parents in the car and my sibling wasn't even going to go, but they had just happened to get back from taking some exam in another state. And so they hopped in the car, not to support me, but to talk to my parents about the exam. And that the entire car ride to go to my graduation, that's what was talked about. And the entire car ride back, that's what was talked about.
Yeah.
And then when we got back home, the rest of my family was here. And the entire time we sat together and ate dinner, we talked about my siblings' exam. I cried a lot during this time. I had been through my tough senior year and my tough years of high school, and I was finally getting to like my freedom, which was conservatory. And then everything was just crashing down. All the good I was supposed to experience was gone. It was especially dark when I heard back from my dream college that it was going to be all virtual for my freshman year. So I would not be on campus, no classes, absolutely nothing would be in person. I was going to have to stay at home with my family from my childhood bedroom and do my first year of college that way. And we didn't know, maybe my sophomore year, nothing was certain.
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
was like, I didn't have like, it's just a year. I can look forward to sophomore year. I didn't know what it was going to be like. So everything was so uncertain. I was working so hard for this. And it was like, well, what do I work hard for now?
Yeah.
And I couldn't get a job because of the pandemic. My students were gone. So then I couldn't get any money. And I was just like completely stuck and living like a kid. I didn't really get to like get those growing up experiences.
Yeah.
I was just stuck, and it felt like another year of high school, really, the first year of college.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, something I talked a lot about is I was homeschooled. So a lot of these traditional like graduation milestones that you get in high school, I didn't have those either. So I was really looking forward to the college graduation as like this ceremony. We'd already paid for our caps and gowns. The school refunded everybody and sent them back. So I didn't have like anything to take pictures in. Joe had his cap and gown. He still had it. And his cap and gown made the rounds. All of my graduating friends were texting people being like, does anyone have one I can borrow? So literally we would just like leave it out front of our building in a plastic bag, and it would just come like circulating. And then eventually Joe took some pictures of me to try to commemorate it. But of course they're, phone quality pictures in my front courtyard. It's different. Our graduation, we were supposed to have an online commencement, and they messed it up so badly. Everything was pre-recorded. None of it was live. They had made it seem like it would be live streamed. And they had asked anyone who wanted to submit a quote, a photo, and just your name, so that they said they would have a slideshow. So everybody's photo and like a little quote by them, instead of having like a walking procession. So there was like a time that this ceremony was supposed to be. It was all pre-recorded, and it wasn't even live streamed. So it was like links to different videos, and then you would just click through it. We had been quarantining with my family, Joe and I, for a little bit, and just beginning the wedding planning process. And so my mom and I had been wedding dress shopping. You could do that with one person by yourself, wearing gloves and a mask and everything. But we had been trying on wedding dresses, and then we raced home to do this and like projected it on the TV. And realized how disappointing it was. And then there wasn't a slideshow of names. You had to type your name into a search bar to even see it. And my name wasn't there, even though I had submitted everything in plenty of time. And then I searched all my friends. None of their names were there. They had forgotten like the entire music program. Everyone was like, okay, but you did have time to do this sufficiently. I understand that there was a lot of stuff that there was no time to plan, but this was so low effort. I think also, and this is no one's fault, but getting engaged, as much as Joe and I were thrilled, and it was time, we'd been together for years, we'd been excited about that. I was very surprised though. I had no idea. I thought we were like 2 years out from that. What was weird is that there was nothing anyone could do to substitute the graduation. My family they sent me like cards and gifts and stuff like that. They tried to make it special, like met over Zoom. Then I felt like everything kind of got overshadowed with wedding planning. And as a woman, you're oftentimes treated like the best thing you can do with your life is get married. And my marriage is not an accomplishment, it's a relationship, and relationships take work, but it's not something that I worked for. My college degree is the hardest thing I've ever worked on and the biggest accomplishment I've ever had. But there was nothing more anyone could do about that. Versus wedding planning, there's a lot of that you can do without having to be in person, looking at vendors and researching locations and all of that. So it felt like everybody jumped right from, before I even really felt like I got a chance to acknowledge that I had graduated and climbed my Everest as a person with health issues too, in particular, that everyone jumped into just celebrating the engagement because that was the thing that could be celebrated. I don't wish that anyone in my life had done anything differently, except the school maybe. I kept forgetting that I had graduated. That same trip that I went and we locked down with my parents for a couple of weeks, we had because I had already had my recital dress, we had a virtual recital, not for credit. I wrote the paper for credit, but I performed selections from my recital. My parents have a like very big open house, and my childhood best friend's piano teacher was local. I hired her, so she came in like masked and everything, and could read my music for me. We had like one rehearsal. I brought my dress. My best friend and her husband were able to be there. We like kept all the doors open and had like everybody spaced out. We live streamed it. I used music because I was just, my brain was fried. Joe was working at Starbucks at the time, so Starbucks did a thing where they let people take like several weeks, I think it might have even been 2 months off of work while they still got paid. You could either keep working and you get a raise temporarily, or you could stop working and be paid. But because we knew that I was immunocompromised, but there was no guidelines on how this affected POTS, he was so scared. And we lived separately at this time. He would go to his place after work when he was still working. He would throw his clothes immediately in the wash, get in the shower, and then come see me. So he was being so careful. There were a lot of sweet moments, but I think it also just was this massive identity crisis of like, I've been waiting my whole life to get to call myself an opera singer, get my flowers moment. And now I'm so focused on, in the stage of life I expected to focus on being a graduate, I'm focused on being a fiance. And as happy as I am about that, I wished I had had a milestone marker. So that's what I was mourning the most.
My next section is titled Things Get Brighter. So yay. I found an organization called Through the Staff, which is where you can volunteer to teach music lessons to families that can't afford it. So I was still getting the teaching experiences that I wanted to get. I also started finding online students through my social media platforms. So then I was also getting a very small, but some income. So that was helpful to have. And since it has really, really flourished, especially when I was going through my abusive situation and PTSD was first becoming a thing and I couldn't teach in person, that has really, really flourished because online teaching, that's the thing with the pandemic that we'll talk about, is that it's like continued online instruction and online everything has been a huge, huge thing. Sometimes I'll argue that I feel like sometimes I teach better online than I do in person.
That a lot.
Because I have much more experience. And there's a lot of factors where online teaching can be more beneficial to certain students. And so I had my last in-person private lesson with my private teacher. This was a very sad moment because my high school violin teacher that I had first, he passed away with cancer at the beginning of my senior year, right when I was about to start applying for schools. And he passed me off to one of his close friends, and this is who I was working with now. And so there was that kind of connection. I'm going through this mourning of losing my teacher that has prepared me to make it to conservatory. And I've been handed off now to one of his friends that knew him his whole life and would tell me like stories of him. So it was very sweet. So it was really hard to not get to have that special last lesson with your private teacher before you go off to conservatory. I'm not sure about how it is for other instruments and musicians and everything, but
same for me. Violin, I fainted at mine, so but yes, it is special.
Yeah, it's a very special moment as you're like departing from your old teacher and then going on into college. I feel so bad that I didn't make my teacher do this, but he made an exception and he let me have my last lesson in person. But we were in his place and it was he usually teaches in his basement. It was more of an upstairs and we were like further apart from each other and masks were on and everything. But although it still wasn't the same, it was still nice that he got to like hear my violin in person and like being able to like critique with that sound and the resonance and everything. And it felt a little bit more normal. It mattered that my freshman year was going to be virtual, but that didn't take away from the excitement I had to be studying with the teacher I was going to be studying with. It was my dream teacher, who's known as one of the best violin teachers in the world. So I was thrilled. I had just barely made it in her studio. So I was very happy that I got that opportunity. I was really, really happy to have a college level music theory class. I was obsessed with music theory. My high school teachers they didn't offer AP music theory in my high school, so they were always giving me like packets of music theory to do like for fun, which probably sounds really insane to anybody else, but I loved music theory. So I was like, good, I can actually take like an official music theory class. And I was happy to meet like other music theory nerds and people that like to do research and stuff. And I did meet some people like that. So that was kind of my drive going forward, is that, yeah, like going to conservatory, it could have been at 10, but it's going to be like a 6. And that's better than a 0. So I'm going to take it. I think one of the trickiest parts was not being able to like talk to people. Like there was no like saying hi in the hallways. It was hard to get to know other people your age at the time. That's why I was very thankful for social media, because I think what we kind of did was, if there was someone from your school and you kind of like worked semi together in a group project, or you saw their name in your class and they popped up on your like Facebook potential friends list, you friended them on Facebook. Like that was kind of what everybody was doing. It was just kind of funny, because I know some people, it's like, no, it's someone I'm really close with, that's who I have on my socials. We were kind of just all like, that's how we made friends, I guess. One good way that I got to know some people was that my music theory professor at the time would open our music theory classes 10 minutes early. So we were all encouraged to go in and we could just talk about pretty much anything. I met 3 of my best friends at the time that way. And they became my best friends even during a pandemic, just solely by texting. We'd work on like side projects together. We'd talk on FaceTime at random times. I ended up meeting all of them in person, masked during even the heightened pandemic. I also had a sleepover with one, and that was more when the vaccine had already come out and stuff. But classes were interesting and frustrating. I will not forget my brass techniques class. That was the weird thing, is that, yeah, everything was really personal between like the students and the teachers. And my music education advisor, actually, he drove to my house a couple times and like we were exchanging instruments. And then there was a time I also had to go to campus to get instruments. Trumpet players will know, I like broke the trumpet and I couldn't get to my teacher to have like him fix it. I was like, oh my God. It was one of the things he had his practice taking like the valves out, was that, or the whatever's, I don't know, I still forgot how it worked, and I couldn't get the thing back in. And if you don't get it back in the right way, you can't make a sound on the instrument. He's like, make sure you don't do it the wrong way, otherwise you won't be able to play. Okay guys, all right, class is over, whatever, and clicked off. And I was like, oh my God, I can't get it. And I tried asking for help and he wouldn't answer email. It was harder to ask for help when it came to oral skills trouble. I was not a natural at oral skills, any ear training. I didn't have any experience, maybe like a teeny bit in high school. We did some, but my ears were nowhere near where they should have been. And it took a lot of work. I had to have a lot of one-on-one meetings with the professor. And even then, that was like very little hope. I had to practice every single day ear training, which ended up being a blessing in disguise, because now I teach music theory and oral skills lessons. When you struggle with something to that degree, you learn how to teach it and you learn about the struggles that then your students are going through. So blessing in disguise, but man, it was a pain trying to ask for help and that stuff. We still had studio class in the evenings and it was just all online. I think they handled that really, really well. Specifically, my violin teacher, she was incredible at bringing in, all of her former successful students from around the globe, because they didn't have to travel. They could just hop on Zoom. And I learned so much. I'm pretty sure I still have it like somewhere over here. I was going to pull out. It's one of these composition books filled with notes, because I would just sit there and listen to everything they were saying. I'd take little like video snippets too, and they were saying like really like inspirational stuff I could apply to my own playing. We learned so much from that. So there were definitely some really good things. Orchestra over Zoom for 3 hours was so dumb.
How did that even work?
It was awful. It was completely awful. I don't know how they expected it to work. Like nothing, we were all muted too. And there were some people that were in person that lived closer to my school and that would go. But even then, and I knew one of the people that went there, like he said it was awful. And the way everything was like all spread out, that you couldn't really work together as an orchestra. This is all building. And then we sit there for 3 hours with a laptop and are trying to figure out what's happening here, but our sound on our instrument is louder than the laptop and you can't adjust. It was awful. It was a mess. One thing, this is like a very wholesome thing, I guess, to end my little part with, is something that I did to like document it, because it was still my freshman year of conservatory. It was still everything I worked for. I wanted to remember it, even with the bad. I took little like video clips from each of my classes on my YouTube. Like I would put together, like just for me, it's completely private, but like little snippets of things I was learning, if something really like that inspirational moment where your teacher says something like really powerful in class, or something like new we'd be learning and it was explained, and I'd have it on video so I could go back to and look back to it. Like I kind of put those little things together, and I have like little snippets like of memories like from each of my classes all added up. And so it is cool to go back and to see some of those positive things too.
I think that makes a lot of sense too, because I think we all had the sense that we are living through something like historic. So even though it's got a lot of negativity, I think a lot of people felt a lot of like pressure to like document and take it in. I have grandparents who grew up during the Great Depression and World War II. You know that they have certain quirks and behaviors, like they don't throw anything away. I don't think we know as a society yet what like our quirks are going to be of living through this, but I do remember really paying attention to everything. As I'm getting into the fall of 2020, I'm a college graduate, so they tell me. My diploma gets mailed to me, and I was like, cool, this feels hollow. Like the frames that your diplomas, that they send you for your diplomas, my parents had bought me a frame for mine, and it has the cutout for the piece of paper, but then it also has a second little square that you're supposed to hang your tassel from your cap in. I didn't have a tassel because I didn't have a cap. Eventually, my parents gave me a Christmas ornament that said like had a tassel in it and had 2020, like a graduation ornament. I took the tassel out of that and I put it in the frame because that was the only tassel I had. The choir from our school, our director usually includes alumni a couple times a year. They were doing the Messiah virtually. She invited the alumni to participate if they wanted. Messiah is one of those things. There's so many resources out there to learn it that it was pretty easy to transition it into a virtual setting. So she had sent out all the practice tracks and instructions on how to record yourself. I remember setting up my little studio booth with like headphones, and you had to like clap to like cue yourself in so that they could synchronize everybody. I just finished learning and submitted my video for "And the Glory of the Lord." That was like the first song that I learned. And then November 1st, I get COVID. So I had to email her and be like, I don't think I can be in any of the other pieces. I can't learn anything right now.
But you don't know how you got COVID, right? You still don't know
I
for sure.
I really don't know. We were so careful. We had gone apple picking in kind of like a rural area, and there were a lot of people who were making fun of masks. We overheard some conversations that day, but we were outside, we were masked. So most likely it was that. I do remember that I had overheard the people working there make such fun of COVID that as soon as I had symptoms, before I even had the test confirmed, I called them. And I was like, I just want to let you know I have a confirmed case of COVID so that all your employees can get tested. They were like, okay, I guess we'll all get tested. Like they were really sassy on the phone about it. But I was like, I'm at least going to make this your problem and get home, and I'm symptomatic. And I knew immediately. My rapid test was negative, but my longer one was positive. And I was like, absolutely knew. I emailed our professor. I was like, I'm so sorry, I can't participate anymore. So yeah, we did the Messiah, but I'm in one video. It was bad. It was really scary. We still didn't really know what the risk was to me with my specific illnesses. And I probably should have gone to the hospital. I remember I was up wheezing all night, and my pulse oximeter was reading 85 for oxygen. And I was Googling that, and everyone was like, go to the hospital. But living in a major city, I knew I could go to the hospital and I would be sitting in a waiting room because I wasn't actively dying.
Everything else. Yeah.
Yes. It was like, if I wasn't actively dying, if I hadn't lost consciousness, if I wasn't like turning blue, I would just sit in a waiting room for hours, being exposed to everything and uncomfortable. So I was like, okay, I could stay home and possibly die in the comfort of my own home, or I could go to a hospital and possibly die in like fluorescent lighting in a waiting room. Joe never got it. This is what's crazy. Every time I've been exposed to it, Joe has never had it. 4 a.m. And my cat, I hear her little bell on her collar. I hear that flapping sound of a cat throwing up. She had chronic bowel issues. She was always throwing up. She was very old at that point. And I just think to myself, okay, Joe can deal with that in the morning. And then I hear her flop on her side. And I think, well, that's weird. She, again, being old and kind of having arthritis, she would just sort of collapse when she wanted to sit down. But I was like, she wouldn't collapse that close to her vomit. So I turn on my phone flashlight and I look and I see her. She's fully comatose in a pile of her own vomit. And I go over to her and I pick her up. She's fully like floppy. She has no ability to control her muscles, and I'm freaking out. She was diabetic with hyperthyroidism at that time. So I was like, oh my God, what's happening? Her eyes were twitching. I call Joe, I call my parents. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? I think she's dying. She wanted to get up So she was flopping, but she couldn't stand. It was like a fish, you know, when you see like fish flop, that's what she was doing. She was like jolting. So I called the ER vet and I was like, I have COVID. Will you still save my cat? She had lost control of her bowels and bladder. We like wrapped her in a towel. Joe had to like drive. I can't breathe. We dumped her on the doorstep of the emergency vet, ran back. We were like shouting from the parking lot, and then had to like be on the phone to hear like the treatment, like while she was in the room alone. She had had a stroke, her first of many. Exactly 2 years later, she would die. So like literally it was this November 4th. So it was the beginning of the end. And I hadn't realized after I recovered from COVID, like how much worse I was doing, because my physical schedule was so much less demanding than it was in school. I was working from home. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't seeing anyone. So I hadn't realized how much my energy had declined because I had all this free time. That was something that I don't think I realized until about a year later when we got married and the aftermath of my wedding, and realizing how much worse I'd been. I was working from home full-time in market research, which was not my calling, but it was one of those things where like we were going to be getting married, you know, by 26, I would need insurance. Joe's jobs didn't offer insurance. So looking to the future for that, I had a full-time job where I got to work from home and I wasn't really qualified to do anything else. So I couldn't quit. Nothing had opened again. I felt like I was losing who I was. There was this part of me that was like, oh my God, I have time for hobbies. I learned how to do everything. I learned how to do acrylic nails, hair extensions, sewing, dollhouse building. Like I had all these hobbies. And I was going back to therapy, and I really felt like I was doing some of the work I needed to on myself. At the same time, I wasn't in choir. Every alumni thing that happened after that, I did one, but in general, most alumni stuff that was offered after that, I couldn't do because I was caring for a dying cat and we couldn't really leave the house. And I hadn't not sung in a choir since I was 4. So that was weird.
So the injury, right? This is all leading up the over practicing and just the tension that everybody was experiencing in our bodies of being cooped up at home and with the stress of a global pandemic. I got radial tunnel syndrome, which is one of the very least common nerve issues in your arm that you can have. So of course it was something more abnormal, because carpal tunnel I think is the most common, then cubital, and then radial tunnel is like the least common of the bunch. So everything was really going wrong. You know, I was in a pandemic, lost my freshman year online, had no idea what was going to happen my sophomore year, and now I couldn't even play my instrument. This should not have been allowed, but it was done. I got a B in online orchestra because they wanted me to send in a video of me playing the excerpts, but I couldn't play. And I sent in the doctor's note, and they still said that I needed to send in a video playing for my accommodation. So yeah, I'm like, I can't play. And I remember I told one of my friends who was a TA, and she's like, you have to go to the dean. And I did go to the dean, but like nobody really advocated for me. It just kind of all like fell apart. And there's so much going on, like you can't keep track of everything. So it kind of just like they lost part of it. And then I just got to be in orchestra, and there was nothing that I could do about it. I did have to get surgery. The radial tunnel was way too far. Like nothing else was going to help. We tried physical therapy, but ultimately I did need surgery. It was hard even like leading up to the decision to get surgery. My surgery happened January 8th, the day I won't forget, but I was having these issues since like July. And so everything was building and building. And I was like reaching out to people, talking to my teachers, talking to people I'd known that had dealt with injuries, doing physical therapy, trying all the things, all the heat, the ice, the stretches, and just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So ultimately, then finally, against many people's wishes, I was like, I have to do the surgery. My doctor says he's willing to do it. I have to do it.
That's risky.
Yeah. So I think people had put in my head that there was this risk. So I was thinking, I'm like, okay, there's a chance that the surgery is going to go wrong and my career is over. Because that's kind of what I was told, is you never want to go with the unnatural surgery. There was ultimately nothing else to do. I had 2 conversations like a couple days before I went into the surgery, which was during my winter break. One with my music ed advisor. And I was like, what happens if I seriously can't play anymore? Can I continue the music ed degree? Would there be accommodations? Would something be able to work out? I need to know this before I go into the surgery and whatever happens. And so he was very nice and kind of gave some ideas. And so like, I knew I'd be okay, even if I couldn't play anymore. I loved music theory. I knew I wanted to do something further with it. I didn't know if I wanted to, do a music theory podcast, which ended up happening at the time, or if I wanted to go for a PhD eventually in theory or do research. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that that was going to be something at least on the side in my life. And so I talked to my music theory professor at the time, and I was like, is there any way I can do more work with music theory then? If I can't do this, like, what do the options look like for me and what's offered at the school? And so we had a conversation about that as well. For surgery, with what hospitals were like at the time during the pandemic, I had to go in alone. This was actually a pro. I did not want my mom with me in the hospital. I was like, no, please. So I was very happy that I didn't have to have anybody in there with me. I mean, I would have liked to maybe like have a friend, to have somebody there that could, mentally be there for support. But if I had to choose, just nobody. Between my mom and I'm like, nobody. Surgery ended up going okay. It was the decision that needed to be made. So I have my battle scar over here. Yeah, then I needed physical therapy for a few months after that. It wasn't a long period of not playing after surgery, because when you get a surgery like this, you have to start doing the things quickly that you're going to be doing in life. So there's no buildup of scar tissue. And so, yeah, I started playing violin, I think a week after surgery, after I got my cast off and everything. It was a very alone time, very isolating, having to deal with that by myself. Because you lose friends from high school, right? Obviously, when you go into college, that's a natural thing that happens. But even with a pandemic, then how do you make friends during a pandemic when you're also losing your high school friends? It's like you have nobody. I was lucky. I did have my three best friends I was talking about. I had them, but they were like my phone. School had really been like my life in high school. And even though school was still my life freshman year, this was getting to be like pretty unbearable. I wanted the full school experience. So once it was clear that, okay, sophomore year, like, yes, we're going to be in person. I did get the vaccine, so that was a thing. And they said that we would have to be masked at school, which I'll get into. So that was a thing. But school, like, we were going to be in person sophomore year. I was going to get to move in. So I was so thrilled. I was counting down the days until I got to move into school and move to that city. And like romanticizing everything I could in regards to sophomore year. Like when I was packing, when I got like pictures of what my dorm was going to look like everything. I recorded a move-in day vlog, like a dorm tour. I was just ready for it. The interesting difference because of the pandemic was that when I was going into my sophomore year, I was calling it freshman year 2.0 because there was so much I didn't know and that there is to learn. It was really a freshman year, although it was the second year of my degree. It was a freshman year. But the cool thing was that I wasn't walking into school with no friends. I had friends already, and I already knew people. I already knew the professors too. I generally knew who was going to be in this new place in my life.
So you had 2 freshman years. I had 2 senior years.
Yeah, exactly.
October of 2021. It was a COVID wedding, so it was small and spaced and doing everything we could. The vaccine was out. It's funny you talk about romanticizing things. I romanticized getting the vaccine because I was like, oh, this is historic. So I was like taking pictures of everything, like saving my little sticker. I think I still have it because I was like, this is something like when you hear, again, grandparents talking about like the polio vaccine, which made it feel super disrespectful when you had like the anti-vaxxers who were coming out and being like,
that was the wild thing was that, everyone was like begging and praying that there'd be a vaccine. And then once it was there, so many people were like, well, I'm not getting that. And it's like,
it was so, and like having friends who were in medicine, it was heartbreaking to see. Like, that's the thing is like a lot of people lost people because they lost their lives. A lot of people also lost people because they got so radicalized. There was no relationship anymore. A few weeks before my wedding, my cousin dropped dead at 38 and was found a couple days later in his apartment. We don't know if it was COVID related because the morgues were so backed up from all the autopsies they had to do. I did have a moment of feeling like I got my identity back, and I've talked about it more in other episodes. I think it was the networking episode. But having my friends from school sing in my wedding, as well as me and Joe, I sang Walking Down the Aisle. We sang a piece that I had learned in choir in 2019. And having that moment of knowing that my friends were okay volunteering to do that we didn't have enough voices, so we were singing with an audio recording, but it was of us, and my voice teacher was conducting it. So it was like he was there virtually. See, he was live. We live streamed my wedding. That's the thing is everyone learned how to do this stuff. So we had to live stream it. So he was there virtually. And I did have that moment where I was like, I'm a vocalist. No one can take that from me. no matter how much like there's a lack of ceremony, no matter what I'm doing, that's more than what I get paid to do. That's who I am. And I think I really needed that one moment of like, even though there were some like sexist standards about getting married that kind of made me have this identity crisis during our engagement, I think both Joe and I would agree that our wedding felt like such a celebration of who we were. And that included, as musicians, we did this thing where during our rehearsal dinner, we had both agreed our rehearsal dinner space had like, it was like an old theater. So it was a restaurant, but it had like a theater upstairs. So there was a stage with a piano. And we came up with the idea to surprise each other with a song during the rehearsal dinner. We didn't tell each other what it would be. And my thought was like, okay, well, Joe's not going to do something operatic. He's probably going to do something like, you know, folk or country. So I'm not going to do something operatic either. So I had picked a song called Tortured Boy by Brownbird, which is a like band that he likes, that I wasn't even sure that he would remember that I remembered, and taught it to myself, accompanied myself and sang it. What I didn't know is he thought, well, Claire's going to do something operatic, so I'm going to do something operatic too. So when we first started dating, he was learning this song called Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair. And I was recovering from surgery for my voice. When I was like on pain meds, I would like make him sing it for me, like in the hospital. He was there. He found not the standard arrangement of it. He found like a different arrangement of it and accompanied himself on piano. So we sort of gifted the magi to each other by like, he went classical, even though that's my style, and I went contemporary, even though that's his style.
So during my sophomore year, they ended up closing the lounges and the study rooms. It was kind of like a back and forth, like everything would be closed and then they would like open up like one lounge and then they would have to like close it again. We were required to wear our masks unless we were in our dorm or outside. But the school that I attended, it was basically one big building. So it's not like if you're thinking of a regular college campus where you're walking far between classes and like all this, you were in the building the entire time. And as a music major, classes are like back to back to back to back. Yes. So the difficulty was if we have to wear our masks, how do we eat or drink? And that was the thing, was that we were not allowed to eat or drink during our classes. But then you also couldn't really do that in the hallway, because then if you had your mask down, so they had like particular areas where you could, I think it was where you could drink at first was what it was. And then professors were making some accommodations where if you needed to take a drink, you could walk out of the classroom, take a drink, and then come back in the classroom, because then, you know, it wasn't really busy. I once got in trouble for eating my sandwich in the hallway. You know, the way I was eating my sandwich in the hallway between classes, I would pull my mask down, take a bite, put it back up, and I would chew, and I would do that. And I actually got in trouble for that. So they were so strict on it. I was like eating in the bathrooms between classes. It was insane. I told a professor that. I'm like, where are we supposed to eat? There was one professor that was kind about the situation and did let us do this eating during class. Technically, he wasn't supposed to. We did have an experience where we shut down for a week and went all online. It was very, very sudden. And they just said that it was going to be for a week and that then they'd reassess. So in my brain, I'm thinking, oh my God, it's the March 13th thing. It's just a week and then it's going to end up being longer. I didn't know how it was going to be handled. And I was so upset about it that I went out. I literally walked like 30 minutes in the night of Chicago with my best friend at the time. And we went and I bought a betta fish spontaneously because I didn't want to be isolated and alone in my dorm. I was tired of that isolation aloneness. I'm like, well, if I can do something, I'm going to have a betta fish. My best pet in the entire world. Will never forget her. I named her after a Shane Curian and Alice term, Erlenia. Loved her. My mom had been diagnosed with leukemia and like very suddenly and was like a day away from death, according to the doctor. So it was very, very intense. It was really the sports teams that were spreading COVID and ruining it for others. Typical. The conservatory had all of these rules. Like we couldn't even eat. It was so intense. But sports teams, no, they could have their masks off. They were all doing their things and sweating and touching each other and blah. And it was all traced back to them why we had to have the week off. So we were furious about it because we're like, we're here paying how much money for education? And okay, I understand sports. Like, yes, there's a lot to learn there and it is important as well, but like it was affecting our degree. So that was not fair. We were getting very upset about that. And like Claire was saying, the vaccine came out and then there were all these anti-vaxxers and that was why it kept getting worse. It would like kind of get down and be okay. But then like it was coming from the people that weren't vaccinated and then getting around the ones that were vaccinated, but then it was spreading. It was just awful.
And
So
we
that
were in one
fear,
of the better cities. Like
oh, we were.
yes, because most of my family lives in the South and nobody was doing anything.
Oh yeah.
And it was still so bad.
Eventually, once I got to the point where unmasking was allowed and a thing, I still masked for a little bit while longer, longer than others generally. And there were a few reasons for it. I did have 2 chronic conditions. And so dealing with any form of sickness while having chronic conditions, IBS and endometriosis is what I have. When you have those, and if you have a flare up and you're sick on top of it, it makes things unbearable, like impossible. So, and quite literally, I could not afford to get sick. I think a lot of musicians can relate to that. You cannot afford to get sick. No. And at the time you have COVID, you have to miss 2 weeks of work. I did end up masking more again during the abuse. It was easy to cry under my mask during the abuse without people noticing. I had developed what I didn't realize at the time was a strong PTSD trigger of people's breath on me that would set me into an episode. And the mask covering my face, like that was protection to me. And I had to actually teach myself to get comfortable unmasking, because being a teacher too, I mean, when I'm sick, yeah, I'll wear my mask, but being a teacher, I need the kids to be able to see my face. And that's also how they learn too, is learning facial expressions, especially the young kids. They learn with your face expressions and learning what's good, what's wrong, what this means, what that means when you're showing the expression in your face and they watch your mouth move. That's how they learn to even like talk. I'm talking about the really little. When it's safe to not be wearing a mask, I should not be wearing a mask. So I had to like teach myself to do that eventually. It became a little bit of a comfortable habit.
Fast forwarding, didn't have a lot of time for music, didn't have any money because all my money went to either like visiting all the new babies or my cat. Vet bills were insane. We were at the ER vet like once a month. And every time that happens, that's like thousands of dollars. We tried to have lessons, but it just, I was exhausted and broke. Like a lot of people, I'm not special in that way, but it was a lot to deal with. And I am processing burnout and dealing with music school trauma. I oftentimes tell my therapist, I don't know when I'm going to have time to get to the music school trauma, because I got so much like religious trauma and stuff to work out. And I had all these triggers that I think I was finally 2 years later starting to realize. When I would think about things like grad school, I had this like knot in my throat and like pressure in my chest, and thinking about being back in that. And my health had declined. Right after my wedding, I was sleeping 23 hours a day for 2 weeks. I couldn't move. My legs were rock solid. They were so swollen. And I realized, oh gosh, I've gotten a lot worse. I was embarrassed, I think. Since the traditional career was not accessible to me, I kept thinking like, have I failed? How so much time gone by? And gigs do open back up again. So in the spring of 2022, that's when things start to happen. We have our first in-person alumni chorus thing and Easter gigs. And that was right when I decided to get a mobility aid. I talked to my doctor, realized that I really needed assistance with that because I couldn't get through rehearsals. Choir rehearsals, it's a lot of sit, stand, sit, stand. Our alumni chorus gig was with an orchestra. So again, it's a lot of sit, stand. And then Easter is sit for homily, stand for, it's a church service. And I realized I could not stand on the stand cues, have my music open and ready to go, and also hoist myself up. I couldn't just stand with my own muscle anymore. And every time I did stand up, my vision would go black for several seconds. So I would have to fake singing for the first few bars so that I didn't accidentally get out of sync with the conductor, because I couldn't see the conductor. My voice teacher was the conductor at the church job, so he was extremely accommodating. He was like telling me like, oh, if I cast you in an opera, I would have you like slide onto the stage in this. I'd use it as a prop. He was like, he brought joy to that. My other former teacher we had some very sweet conversations. I remember leaving a rehearsal with I think it was the first time she'd seen me with my mobility aid and talking about like, where am I going to stand? How am I going to do this? And she was like, wow, is this all really just from getting COVID? And I was like, COVID made it worse, but I hid a lot from you, not just her, but everybody while I was in school, because I couldn't afford to be thought of as unreliable. And I was real with her. I was like, I shouldn't have had to do that. I shouldn't have had to bend over backwards to be as vulnerable as I was in order to get sympathy, and then also faking strength I didn't have. And I might be paying the price for it permanently, because there's only so long you can run on empty before you break. And I also reminded her of some other students with health issues and disabilities who I did not like the treatment of, because they were less cordial than me, I think is the way I would say it. it's hard, I'm sure you know this, when you're in pain all the time, it's hard to be a ray of sunshine. It is hard to be cheery in the way that people in music school want you to be, like, so like humble and to defer to them. It's hard. You're irritable. You're hurting all the time. I went overboard to try and come off as so polite all the time. And yes, you do have to be nice to other people. But I think that some people took other people's attitudes so personally when they were living with chronic pain. And I was like, I hope that with the influx of people who now have permanent health issues as a result of this pandemic, that at the very least, that is a lesson that we can learn in how to treat people and what to expect of people who have these health issues. Had my first concerts with a walker. Some went well, some were messy. Generally, people were encouraging. It just didn't always translate into practical applications of, you know, what was helpful. There was a finale, like a concert to celebrate our choir conductor's retirement that I really wanted to be a part of. Me and Joe both really wanted to participate because this person meant a lot to both of us. And we both had to back out because I remember we were planning to switch. You don't have to come to every rehearsal. Joe and I were planning to switch on and off. At this point, we couldn't leave Mabel, my cat, alone. And after the first rehearsal, she got so bad that we were like, no, we can't do it. So we backed out. That was very, very sad. I'm still processing with burnout and feeling like a fraud. And at the same time, I feel more like myself than I ever have. And in a lot of ways, I'm happier than I ever have. My family unit is now me and my husband, and I love that. We're trying to live according to our values. I'm focused on therapy. We're trying to be solid in our convictions. And I don't know what my career is going to look like.
And then August of 2022, I ended up getting COVID from an anti-mask, anti-vaxxer that I was living with, unfortunately. Didn't have much control over my living circumstances. I guess still don't. I didn't know I had to miss some work, which was frustrating and scary. There was always that fear of getting it. Yeah, I was fortunate since I'd already been vaccinated that I didn't have it that horrible. I didn't recognize that I had it until I knew someone else I was living with had it. And then all of a sudden I was like, I talked to other people about it too, and they agree there's something about the scratchy throat that's different with COVID.
Yes.
No. So as soon as like I knew I had been living and unmasked with somebody who had it, I was like, oh, okay, I have COVID. And sure enough, I did the at-home test. I did multiple at-home tests and they said, no, I did not have it. And I did them all leading up. So around the same time, I got my rapid said, yes, I had it. So I don't even trust the at-home tests anymore because they did not detect it, but I did have it. I had the fever, the scratchy throat. I know the body aches can be kind of,
yes,
that was a little tough. I had like 2 nights where it was pretty painful.
You cannot get comfortable. And all you want to do is sleep. It's awful.
Yeah. So I dealt with that, but then, it went away as quick as it came. And once my days were up, then I was able to get back into things, but still then I still had that, okay, I can't afford to get sick, so I can't get this again, sort of like thing going on in my head.
Closing, getting to the end of all of this, what I learned and what this means for my career going forward. A year ago, I really tried to take control of my health, going to occupational therapy, finding a bunch more specialists, trying to get more answers, because living with a chronic illness or a disability is a full-time job. And as long as this is crippling me, how am I going to find my way back to music? It didn't lead to any magical solutions. I wish I had like a happy little and then we found a treatment that really worked, and that's not the case, but I know that it's worth doing the work. I'm really trying to, in the process of finding my way back to music, to deconstruct from the really toxic definitions of success. I would love down the road to have a giant Victorian house and host summer getaways for female and femme performers, and have just an environment where we all for a few weeks get to have master classes, do yoga, eat together, and focus on remembering why we fell in love with art to begin with. I would love to have an opera company called Opera of Our Own, focus on equity, diversity, not having one person making all the decisions. So those are things I want to do down the road. I have an idea of what they should look like. It's just a matter of how do I get there? So I don't have a clean, happy ending. I need to sing. I'm a musician. I will always be that. I am also scared. And I am embarrassed with how much time has gone by. but I know what I value. That is the thing that I'm more solid in than I used to be. I value mental health awareness, being aware of the abuse that goes on in this community, advocating for survivors, not letting all of these stories, like Emily's, like so many I know, be buried under the wall of silence that we are forced to adhere to. I want to break cycles. I want to build something of our own where we can invest in our community and not just pour money at the same powers that be that don't need it, and work at a pace that doesn't make us all want to kill ourselves. What I have learned from COVID is, even if my career has sort of been like walking through sludge, I know that I am stronger in my own identity and in my own values, and that I have become more open to non-traditional career paths, even as I'm trying to claw my way to get to them.
I think some of the things that I've learned are like pretty broad and like big picture stuff. Is I've learned who genuinely cares about you and others and who doesn't. That was a really hard realization, is that people I've grown up with or spent my whole life with, like I realized some really dark things about them, about their values and their morals. And that was really jarring and changing. And like you said, the Black Lives Matter movement was huge at the time during the pandemic too. And so you learned a lot about people around you. And then of course the pandemic itself, like who is wearing masks, who and what was the way people spoke about wearing masks or being vaccinated. So you did learn quite a bit about what people's morals and intentions were. You know, it broke a lot of relationships and friendships for a lot of people. And I was growing up when this started, I was 17. So I was still, and I still am navigating the world and understanding everything, but especially then, that was a very vulnerable time in my life. I learned about myself, and I think about a lot of other people too, is that you can really adjust to anything, even if it's really, really hard. And I think that's one thing I took away, is like, okay, I survived a global pandemic. And I'm not talking about just like physically survived it, but mentally survived it. So if I can survive working up to conservatory and having all of those dreams like just fall in front of me, and losing everybody around me and having to stay like at home in my childhood bedroom when I'd worked for this freedom and independence of conservatory and everything, like if I can survive something like that, I'm like, I can really adjust to any circumstance. Yeah, like all these really jarring and insane things can happen, but naturally as human beings we have this like survival instinct mentally and physically, and we're really capable of a lot more than we think about. Final thing that I learned is just that there's so many ways to make music online. I think this has been very helpful as a musician, but also as a music teacher in particular. So it's taught me a lot about ways to teach and ways to make music, and making everything in the classical music world more accessible to everybody. So yeah, there have been lots of, I'm talking about mostly positive things, I guess, that I have learned from the pandemic. And, you know, there's always that question, is, oh, the pandemic's over, right? It's not, I mean, like COVID is never over, right? We're not where we were, because now we do have vaccines and things have been better in control. But as we have left that time of uncertainty and are moving forward with how things are, there's a lot of takeaways from it, and things will never be the same as they were before the pandemic, but hopefully things go more uphill and I have less rocks thrown at me. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you everybody for listening. If you have any feedback, you can reach us at dissonantdialogues@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 872-216-9032 with your feedback. If you'd like to be a guest, or if you have topic ideas or questions, you can contact us through there as well. And also give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. We're Dissonant Dialogues from there, and we like to throw out some sneak peeks or behind the scenes or hints to our episodes on those platforms. So if you're interested in any of that content, you can follow along on there. And all right, we will see you next time.
Stay healthy.
Oh, that's why. Okay. Oh God, Claire's gonna laugh at me. I was in honors chorale at the time in high school because I had
laugh at you.
Oh, you're gonna laugh. Just wait.
Because we can't live in sin.
What is the word? It's driving me crazy. Oh, God, this just makes me sick to my stomach to say out loud, but I have to talk about it. So let me just. And he's like, make sure you don't do it the wrong way. He was such a jerk.
Being like, how? Sorry, sirens. Back in our day.
dude, what happens? I did not say dude. And so I call my, it wasn't surgery, it was from a knife fight in Cambodia. That's what I'm going for. Embroidered on the pillow. That was really powerful. Man, the United States, like, we got to get our stuff together.
You know, anti-capitalism and all that. Yeah.
The new normal is rocks constantly being thrown at you. Sorry, I'm getting like 5 million emails. That's why I'm like distracted. Okay.